The first thing that happened before anyone could scream was that Jonas Reed punched an alien 8 times larger than him square in the knee. This was not bravery. This was panic wearing the clothes of courage. The worst part was that the creature did not even flinch. Instead it leaned down, its bone-plated face inches from his own, and split its jaw open in a mocking laugh so wide Jonas could see past its teeth and into a second row of pulsing red glands. Kip 7, the floating drone supposed to protect him, offered a cheerful announcement that Jonas had just escalated a diplomatic misunderstanding into an interspecies humiliation ceremony. Then the moon's ground trembled beneath their feet like something ancient had just woken up annoyed. That was the moment Jonas realized two things at once. First, he had absolutely no idea how to fight. Second, the alien definitely did. Hours earlier, Jonas had been staring out the shuttle window at the emerald swirls of Arctura 9, trying to convince himself he was excited. It was supposed to be a research mission, an easy one, something safe enough that even someone like him, a xenobiologist with more complaints than survival instincts, could handle. Dr. Lyra Quinn, the mission leader, had spoken calmly the entire descent while tapping notes into her pad as if the beauty outside was no more interesting than a fungus sample. Kip 7 drifted at shoulder level listing emergency procedures in a voice that managed to be both bored and foreboding. Jonas had filmed a voice log complaining that the synthetic protein bars in their pack tasted like sadness mixed with wet cardboard. He thought the worst part of the day would be lunch. That hope dissolved the moment they landed. The jungle around them was a cathedral of green light and mist. Giant leaves shimmered overhead like stained glass windows. Everything felt too alive. Jonas knelt beside claw tracks so large he could lie down in them and still have room for a picnic blanket. Kip 7 calculated the probability of Jonas being eaten and updated the number every few seconds with rising enthusiasm. Lyra remained focused, but Jonas noticed she kept glancing at the tree line as if expecting someone, or something, to step out. When it did, Jonas was alone. Lyra and Kip were still scanning the remains of an ancient obelisk half buried in vines while Jonas wandered several hundred meters off the main trail to collect soil samples. He remembered bending down, brushing moss from a stone, then freezing when a shadow blocked the sun. Turning slowly, he found himself staring into the armored chest of Varro K, an alien predator whose presence felt like a verdict. Instinct shoved aside intelligence. Jonas leapt backward, nearly tripping on his own boots, then assumed what he believed resembled a combat stance. Feet spread, arms raised, chin tucked in, all the dramatic poses he had seen in documentaries about martial artists, but had never practiced beyond closing his fridge aggressively. The creature tilted its head. Its jaw unlocked with a sound like cracking stone. Then it laughed. It was a laugh so deep and resonant Jonas felt it more than heard it, vibrating through his bones like he had become a tuning fork for humiliation. The alien imitated his stance with exaggerated slowness, mockingly shifting its legs and lifting its arms in a perfect reflection of Jonas. Its eyes glowed with a mix of humor and pity. Jonas realized, mortified, that it was not preparing to attack. It was mocking him. Then without warning the alien stepped aside, opening a path as though daring Jonas to run. He did exactly that, sprinting through the underbrush, branches whipping his face, lungs burning. But the alien followed at a lazy pace, keeping just close enough that Jonas could hear its breath, a steady rumble that suggested it could catch him whenever it chose. By the time Jonas broke through the foliage and stumbled back into the clearing where Lyra and Kip waited, he was gasping so hard he could barely speak. Lyra looked up calmly, then froze as Varric stepped into view behind him, towering over the greenery. Kip 7 immediately tried to position itself between Jonas and danger but instead hovered slightly off-center because one of its stabilizers stuck again. Jonas attempted to explain the jaw-splitting laugh but what came out sounded like he was choking on invisible bees. Kip generated a holographic reenactment that displayed Jonas' ridiculous stance in slow motion with helpful arrows pointing at each mistake. Lyra pinched the bridge of her nose, muttering something about poorly calibrated drones. Before they could regroup, the ground vibrated. It started as a subtle tremor, the sort that might come from heavy machinery miles away. But there was no machinery on this moon. The tremor grew into rolling waves of movement beneath the soil, shaking leaves loose from branches and sending dust spiraling upward. Jonas staggered as the earth under his boots lifted slightly, then dropped in a pulse. Kip's 7 sensors beeped frantically. Lyra grabbed Jonas by the arm to steady him. Jonas turned toward Varric. The alien was no longer mocking. Its posture sharpened, muscles tightening beneath bone armor. Its head snapped toward the trembling earth as if recognizing a familiar sound, one it wished it had never heard again. For a moment the alien predator looked almost afraid. Jonas swallowed hard. The laugh was gone. The mockery was gone. Something older than either of them had stirred beneath their feet, something large enough to make even Varric anxious. Jonas suddenly understood that the creature had not come to hunt him. It had come to warn him. The tremor stopped as suddenly as it began, leaving the jungle eerily silent. Varric took one last look at Jonas, then at the shaking earth, and let out a low growl that might have been frustration or fear. Without another gesture, it vanished back into the trees, moving with impossible speed for something its size. Jonas stared after it, breathing hard. Kip 7 hovered beside him and informed him in its monotone voice that his chances of survival had just decreased significantly. Jonas already knew. Whatever lived beneath Arctura 9 had woken, and it was not laughing. The debrief began with an awkward silence broken only by the buzzing drift of Kip 7 as it projected a replay of Jonas tripping over a vine while fleeing earlier. The hologram showed him flailing like a malfunctioning inflatable tube man. Jonas lunged to swipe through the projection, but the drone simply hovered upward out of reach, reciting a list of his tactical failures. Dr. Lyra Quinn kept her arms crossed as she paced around the cracked obelisk half buried in moss. When Jonas insisted for the 5th time that the alien had laughed at him with its jaw split open like a carnivorous book, Lyra sighed and asked him to take 3 deep breaths while she recalibrated her patience. That irritated Jonas so much he forgot to breathe at all for a moment before gasping like he had been underwater. He had never felt so ridiculous, especially because there was a chance he had survived only because the creature found him too pathetic to kill. Kip 7 finally dimmed the embarrassing hologram and read out a probability chart indicating that Jonas had not been attacked because he was being evaluated for unknown reasons. Jonas did not know whether to feel relieved or offended. Lyra meanwhile tapped data into her pad, frowning at the readings from the obelisk. According to her, the structure emitted faint pulses that matched the tremors they felt earlier. Jonas pointed out that the giant predator had reacted to the tremor like it recognized the danger. Lyra admitted that was the part concerning her the most. Kip announced it had detected biological residue on the obelisk, including traces that corresponded to the predator's species. Jonas muttered that maybe the alien had ancestors who built it. Kip replied that this was a possibility but delivered it in a tone that implied Jonas only got lucky guessing. Jonas felt a presence before he saw it. A shadow stretched across the clearing as the predator emerged again, moving with a silent purpose. Jonas' body stiffened. He was certain it had returned to finish the job. Forcing himself to stay upright, he squeaked out an unconvincing threat about knowing martial arts. The creature ignored him. Instead it raised an arm and pointed toward the cracked obelisk. Its expression carried the weight of someone trying to communicate with toddlers. Lyra stepped forward cautiously and asked if it could understand them. The predator responded by tapping its chest, where a small fragment of metallic crystal blinked faintly. A moment later, the fragment clicked and a distorted voice emerged, choking out fragments of speech. Moon waking. Hunter-devourer. Run. Jonas felt his skin crawl. The words were more terrifying because the predator did not sound triumphant. It sounded weary. Lyra asked what exactly was waking, but the fragment sputtered and hissed into static. The creature growled with frustration and struck the obelisk with the back of its hand. Jonas flinched. Lyra remained still. Kip 7 politely remarked that this was unhelpful behavior, which earned it a glare from both Jonas and the alien. The predator took a step forward, raising its massive hand as if to touch Lyra, and Jonas reacted instinctively by pulling her back. A breathless moment passed where Jonas thought he might die for his heroic impulsiveness. But the creature did not strike. Instead, it mimicked Lyra's earlier action by tapping the obelisk again, more gently this time. Jonas realized it was trying to warn them, not attack. Before he could process that, the ground rumbled once more, deeper than before, like a great exhale rising from the center of the moon. Trees shook. Pebbles danced across the ground. Even the predator crouched in readiness. When the tremor faded, the creature let out a guttural sound that Jonas interpreted as frustration. It turned and disappeared into the jungle again, its massive form moving like a shadow that refused to obey the laws of size. Jonas could not tell whether they were now under its protection or simply included in its mission by accident. Lyra watched the direction it went with furrowed brows. Her silence was unsettling. When Jonas asked what she was thinking, she said only that the readings were worse than expected, and whatever had been dormant beneath this moon was fully active now. Back at camp, Jonas busied himself reorganizing supplies mostly to avoid thinking. Kip hovered above him, occasionally recalculating survival odds, which Jonas pretended not to hear. Lyra sat at the console typing rapidly, so absorbed she ignored Kip's attempts to provide analysis. Jonas finally asked her directly what she was keeping from him. Lyra stiffened, insisting she was not withholding anything, which was a lie so transparent Jonas felt it insulted him more than the alien's laugh. He pressed further and caught a flicker of guilt in her eyes before she turned away. During the evening data review, Jonas' curiosity boiled over. When Lyra stepped outside to check the perimeter sensors, Jonas snatched her data pad and managed to guess her password on the second try. He justified the invasion of privacy by telling himself they were all probably going to die anyway. The pad contained mission files marked confidential, including ancient star maps showing Arctura 9 as a quarantine zone. More disturbing was an archived video file showing ruins much like the obelisk they had discovered, except intact. A recorded voice explained that something called the Great Maw had once nearly consumed entire regions of the galaxy. The ancestors of the predator species had sealed it beneath this moon. Jonas felt cold all over. Before he could read more, Lyra returned. She saw the pad in his hands, and for the first time since the mission began, she panicked. Jonas expected anger, but instead she looked terrified. She said the predator was not hunting them. It was trying to prevent a catastrophic repetition of history. Jonas asked why she had brought them here if she knew the risks. Lyra admitted her orders had been to ensure the integrity of the obelisks. She had not expected them to be cracked, weakened, or failing. Kip 7 interrupted their argument with an alert. Something was moving through the trees. Jonas braced for another appearance from the predator, but the shape was wrong. Whatever approached was slithering, enormous, and moving underground. The tremor was subtly synced to its movement. Jonas suddenly understood the urgency in the predator's eyes earlier. Varric had not been stalking him. He had been trying to keep him alive long enough to realize the real threat. The earth pulsed again, closer this time, as if warning them the moon was no longer sleeping at all. The first sign that something beneath Arctura 9 was tearing its way into the world came as a deep, rolling groan that shivered through the soil like the moon itself was straining to breathe. Jonas Reed froze mid-step, one hand braced on a tree trunk as the ground swelled beneath him in a slow, horrifying rise. Kip 7 drifted backward and announced that subterranean displacement suggested a mass at least the size of a small starship. Jonas wished the drone had chosen any phrase other than small starship because that made imagining their death distressingly easy. Dr. Lyra Quinn steadied herself on a boulder, her usual calm fractured for the first time. Jonas caught the flicker of fear in her eyes before she masked it again. The swelling earth broke open in an explosive surge of dirt and rotted roots. Jonas staggered back as something massive and slick burst through the ground, its body rippling with pale bioluminescent lines that pulsed like veins. It twisted upward, a titan worm-like creature bigger than anything Jonas had ever imagined. Its mouth opened in a ring of teeth that clicked against each other with a grinding rhythm, as though savoring the anticipation of eating. Jonas would have screamed if his throat had agreed to work. Kip 7 rotated frantically, analyzing, predicting, recalculating, all in a single panicked blur of movement. Lyra stumbled as the creature slammed back to the ground, its vibrations knocking over trees like saplings. A roar cut through the chaos, sharp and furious. Varrock emerged from the treeline, sprinting toward the creature with a speed that defied his size. Jonas would have sworn the alien had been kilometers away, yet here he was launching himself at the monster in a burst of bone-plated fury. Varrock leapt onto the rising segment of the leviathan's body, slashing with serrated gauntlets that sparked against the worm's thick hide. The great maw, as Lyra had called it in her stolen files, reacted violently, twisting its bulk and flinging Varrock through the air like a pebble. He hit the ground with a force that made Jonas wince, but the alien rolled to his feet, stumbling only slightly before charging again. Jonas was stunned. The alien who mocked his fighting stance now battled something that looked capable of swallowing mountains. There was no hesitation, no fear, only determination so fierce it made Jonas feel small. The great maw reared again, its bioluminescent lines brightening as it prepared another strike. Varrock dodged, but not quickly enough this time. The worm slammed into him, sending him skidding across the ground until his armored back crashed into a tree, cracking the trunk clean in half. Jonas acted without thinking. He sprinted toward Varrock even as Lyra shouted his name, even as Kip warned that this was statistically unwise. Jonas reached him just as the worm lunged forward again. Varrock was dazed, trying to rise but slipping on the churned earth. Jonas grabbed the alien's arm, hauling with all the strength his terrified body could muster. The two of them stumbled aside as the worm's mouth closed where Varrock's torso had been seconds earlier. Jonas felt the rush of air from its snapping jaws and smelled the strange metallic tang of its breath. It was the closest he had ever come to being eaten, and he hoped deeply it would also be the last. For a moment, Varrock stared at Jonas with visible confusion, as though unable to process the idea of a human willingly jumping into danger. Jonas did not know what the alien expected, but gratitude was definitely not part of Varrock's expression. More like disbelief sprinkled with mild irritation. Jonas yelled at him to move anyway. Varrock let out a grunt that might have been acknowledgement, or possibly annoyance that he had needed help at all. The ground trembled again as the great maw began to sink back into the earth, retreating or preparing for another strike. Lyra shouted that it was repositioning to breach again in a different location. Kit confirmed this by projecting a map with seismic signatures. Jonas did not understand any of it, but Varrock did. The alien rose fully, towering over Jonas, and gestured toward a ridge overlooking the exposed obelisk. Jonas hesitated until Varrock growled, a clear command to follow. At the ridge, the obelisk's glowing cracks pulsed in sync with the worm's movements underground. Lyra arrived breathless and shaken. She pointed at the symbols flickering along the stone's surface, explaining that the obelisk was a containment anchor failing under stress. The creature beneath them, once imprisoned by Varrock's ancestors, was breaking free. Varrock snarled something guttural, then punctuated it by striking the obelisk with his fist, causing the ancient stone to ring like a deep bell. Lyra explained that sealing the creature required triggering something called the Tri-Shadow Hunt, a ritual once used by Varrock's people to subdue the Great Maw. Varrock responded with a series of gestures indicating agreement, but also contempt. The ritual, as Lyra understood, demanded 3 combat roles: the bait, the striker, and the lure. Jonas realized with mounting dread that Varrock had nominated him for one of those roles. Possibly the bait. Probably the bait. In fact, Jonas suspected Varrock saw him as the least useful combatant, and therefore the most expendable. Jonas argued that he was absolutely not qualified to be bait, lure, striker, or anything related to being near the Great Maw. Varrock made a sharp gesture that translated loosely to complaining is useless, which did not make Jonas feel better. Kip provided analysis showing that the ritual method offered the highest chance of survival, which made Jonas feel much worse. Lyra told Jonas that his earlier act of saving Varrock made him part of this now, whether he liked it or not. Jonas wished he had let the alien get flattened for just another 10 seconds. Despite his protests, the planning began. Varrock sketched rough diagrams into the dirt with claws sharp enough to cut stone. Jonas tried to understand the strategy, which seemed to involve coordinated movements, timed distractions, and a willingness to run directly toward danger while hoping not to be eaten. Varric demonstrated various motions, each more terrifying than the last. Jonas attempted to mimic them, failing each time. Even Kip commented that Jonas lacked the required balance for not dying. Lyra analyzed the obelisk and confirmed it was losing stability rapidly. A countdown had begun whether they wanted one or not. The great maw breached again in the distance, its body arching above the trees before crashing back down with a thunderous impact. The shockwaves sent leaves whirlwinding into the air like a storm of green confetti heralding their doom. Varric placed a heavy hand on Jonas' shoulder, startling him. Jonas looked up to see the alien's expression had shifted. There was no mockery now, no ridicule, only an acknowledgement that the human beside him had chosen to act rather than run. It was not quite respect, but it was close enough to make Jonas stand a little straighter. The great maw roared, a sound that tore through the valley in a vibrating wave. Jonas felt the scream in his ribs. Varric growled back, accepting the challenge. Lyra tightened the straps of her gear and activated her wrist scanner. Kip hovered lower, preparing its limited arsenal. The hunt had begun. The days that followed moved with a strange mixture of slowness and urgency, as if time itself was uncertain about how to behave after the events that had unfolded. Ryan felt the echo of that night lingering around him like a scent that refused to fade. Every time he walked through the hallways of the mansion, his mind returned to the dimly lit scene of the terrace, the glimmer of the stars above, and the wave of emotions that had almost swept him into doing something impulsive. He tried to bury himself in routine, convincing himself that distraction was the best shield against the thoughts creeping back into his mind. Yet distraction proved weak. Whenever he tried to focus on work, his mind would wander back to Amara, her steady voice, her unexpected courage, and the way she had looked at him was something he could not clearly decipher. Meanwhile, the preparations for the upcoming guest event in the mansion intensified. Servants moved around with disciplined haste, renovations were carried out in select rooms, and the atmosphere held a layered tension that seemed to grow thicker each day. The announcement had been made that foreign business delegates would soon arrive, and every detail had to be perfect. Despite the house buzzing with activity, Ryan felt strangely alone. One afternoon, while going through some documents in his study, he sensed a quiet presence near the doorway. He looked up and found Amara standing there, her posture composed but her eyes carrying something unspoken. Without waiting for an invitation, she stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. Ryan braced himself, unsure whether her visit would soothe his mind or shatter whatever balance he had managed to rebuild. She walked closer to his desk before speaking, choosing each word carefully, as if testing its weight. She told him that the preparations for the event were going smoothly, but there were certain matters that required his input regarding the guest arrangements. Her tone was professional, steady, and yet Ryan sensed that she was avoiding something deeper. He wondered whether she too carried the lingering echo of their conversation on the terrace, and whether she was deliberately trying to build a wall between them. As she handed him the documents she needed him to review, their hands brushed for an instant. It was the smallest contact, but it sent a jolt through him, reviving everything he had fought to suppress. She pulled her hand back quickly, almost too quickly, and stepped aside to maintain distance. Ryan studied her silently for a moment, noticing the faint weariness in her expression. He asked her if she was overworking herself, but she dismissed the concern with practiced ease, saying that she was simply ensuring everything went according to plan. Her avoidance only deepened his suspicion that she was struggling internally. He wanted to probe further, but he held himself back, sensing that pushing her now would only make her retreat even more. After going through the documents, Ryan agreed to the adjustments she recommended. Their exchange remained polite, measured, and oddly restrained, as though both of them were trying not to step across an invisible line. When she finally excused herself and left the study, the silence she left behind felt heavier than her presence. Later that week, a brief storm swept across the region. Dark clouds gathered, rain hammered against the windows, and thunder rolled like distant warnings. The storm forced everyone indoors, adding an unsettled mood to the already tense environment. That evening, Ryan walked through the dim hallways, drawn by the sound of faint commotion near the storage area. When he reached the corridor, he saw two servants struggling with heavy crates that had nearly toppled. Amara stood beside them, guiding the process with calm authority. The moment she noticed Ryan approaching, she instructed the servants to set the crates aside and take a short break. Once they were gone, she finally allowed herself a slow breath. Ryan noticed her shoulders sag slightly, a brief crack in her usual composed demeanor. He asked her if she was all right, and for the first time, she did not rush to reassure him or hide behind neutrality. Instead, she admitted that the upcoming event was proving more stressful than expected, and that she felt responsible for everything running smoothly. Her honesty surprised him, not because she rarely spoke the truth but because she rarely revealed vulnerability. He stepped closer, and though she did not step back, she looked away for a moment. He told her that she did not have to carry everything alone and that he trusted her abilities more than she realized. The words came out softer than he intended, carrying a tenderness he failed to mask. She looked up at him then, her expression touched by an emotion she did not bother to hide this time. For a moment, the world outside the storage corridor seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of them standing across a small but charged distance. Before anything else could unfold, a servant rushed in to inform Amara that the interior decorators needed her guidance urgently. She straightened immediately, thanked Ryan for his concern, and left without looking back. But that shared moment remained with him long after she walked away. Over the next few days, Ryan noticed that Amara kept her interactions with him shorter, almost carefully managed. She was not cold, but she maintained a certain distance, enough to suggest that she was trying to regain control over herself. Ryan respected her space, though it frustrated him more than he was willing to admit. As the date of the event drew near, the mansion appeared more alive than ever. Decorations were finalized, security checks were conducted, and additional staff were briefed on their roles. Yet beneath the surface of all this preparation lay something unspoken between Ryan and Amara, something quietly building, waiting for the right moment to surface again. And that moment, though either of them knew it yet, was approaching far faster than they imagined. The morning of the event arrived with a quiet intensity that settled over the mansion like a low hum beneath every footstep. The skies were clear, the air cool, and sunlight filtered through the tall windows in soft, golden layers. Servants hurried with last-minute arrangements, carrying polished trays, adjusting floral displays, and making sure every inch of the halls gleamed. Yet beneath the surface of all that movement, there was an undercurrent of anticipation that neither Ryan nor Amara could ignore. Ryan woke earlier than usual and stood for a long moment near the window of his room. He watched the staff moving through the garden below as if observing a world slightly detached from his own. His mind drifted to Amara, as it often did, recalling the tension in her eyes and the unspoken silence she had been carrying since that moment in the corridor. He wondered whether today would force them into another collision or grant them more silence to avoid the truth they both skirted around. Amara, on the other hand, had barely slept. She walked through the property with a clipboard in her hand, checking every detail, speaking swiftly to staff, and ensuring nothing slipped through the cracks. She moved with a calm precision, but beneath her steady tone lay a quiet storm she kept deeply hidden. Every time she heard footsteps behind her, a part of her expected it to be Ryan, and every time it turned out not to be him, she felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. By noon, the first of the guests began to arrive. The mansion servants opened the tall wooden doors, greeting foreign business representatives, partners, and dignitaries who stepped inside with expressions of admiration. Ryan appeared at the entrance shortly after, dressed immaculately, his presence strong and composed. He welcomed each guest with practiced ease, offering warm hospitality and measured conversation. Amara observed from a distance, ensuring everything proceeded smoothly. Her eyes lingered on Ryan for only brief moments before she forced herself back to her responsibilities. She needed focus more than anything, for today was far too important to allow personal confusion to distract her. As the reception unfolded, soft music filled the main hall while guests mingled with drinks in their hands. Servers moved with graceful efficiency, offering refreshments and guiding people toward the conference area. Ryan's attention remained mostly on the attendees, yet every now and then, his gaze would flicker across the room, searching instinctively for Amara even before he realized it. Whenever he caught glimpses of her giving instructions or speaking with staff, he felt his thoughts pulling toward her again. Hours went by in a smooth rhythm until late afternoon when a minor problem emerged. One of the foreign delegates required last-minute adjustments in his accommodation due to security preferences, and the matter needed immediate handling. Amara stepped in to manage the situation, but she soon realized that she required Ryan's approval for the requested changes. Reluctantly, she approached him where he stood with two guests near the center of the hall. She waited for a natural pause in the conversation before addressing him. Her voice remained steady and professional as she explained the issue. Ryan nodded and excused himself from the guests, motioning for her to walk with him toward the side hallway. The moment they were away from the main crowd, he slowed his pace and glanced at her, sensing the guarded calm she had wrapped around herself. She detailed the adjustments that were needed, and he approved them without hesitation, trusting her judgment entirely. Yet as she turned to leave and relay the instructions to the staff, he gently stopped her by calling her name. She paused, her back half turned, her hands tightening slightly on the clipboard she held. When she faced him again, he saw the shadow of exhaustion under her eyes and something even deeper hiding behind her controlled mask. He asked her if she was holding up well. His voice was quiet, almost too soft for the busy hallway they stood in. She told him she was managing, though her expression hinted otherwise. She insisted that her priority was ensuring the event succeeded without flaws. Ryan stepped a little closer, lowering his voice further. He reminded her that she did not have to carry the burden alone, and that she needed to stop forgetting she was human. The words struck her far more deeply than he intended. For a brief moment, her composure wavered, and she looked away as if steadying herself. She thanked him, but her tone held a strain that he could not ignore. Before he could say anything more, another staff member approached urgently, pulling her away again. Evening arrived, bringing with it the most important segment of the event, where Ryan was expected to deliver a formal address to the guests. The main hall was arranged elegantly with glowing lights, polished tables, and an atmosphere of dignified calm. As the attendees settled, Ryan prepared to step up to the small stage at the front. Amara stood near the back, overseeing the seating arrangement, and ensuring every detail remained seamless. Although she was far enough to remain unseen by most, she watched Ryan with a quiet attentiveness, feeling an inexplicable nervousness. When Ryan began speaking, his voice filled the hall with confidence. He spoke about growth, partnerships, vision, and responsibility. His speech was steady, eloquent, and perfectly delivered. But beneath all the practiced poise, his eyes scanned the room until they found her. For just a second, their gazes met across the hall. Amara felt her breath catch unexpectedly, and she quickly looked away before anyone noticed. After the speech ended, applause filled the hall, and the event transitioned into a formal dinner. The atmosphere softened, conversations grew livelier, and the earlier tension dissolved into a calm elegance. Ryan mingled with the guests again, though his attention was divided. He noticed Amara slipping out of the hall, likely to check on the remaining arrangements. Something in him urged him to go after her. He excused himself quietly and followed her down the quieter corridor that led toward the back rooms where staff managed supplies. He found her standing near a window, taking a moment to breathe. The soft evening light touched her profile, highlighting the weariness she had tried so hard to hide. When she heard his approaching footsteps, she straightened instantly, but he raised a hand gently, urging her not to pretend. For the first time that day, she let her guard drop just a little. She admitted how overwhelming everything had been and how difficult it was to balance her responsibilities with the weight of everything unspoken between them. Her voice trembled slightly, revealing the internal struggle she had been fighting alone. Ryan stood before her, feeling the distance between them shrink without either of them stepping closer. He told her that he did not want her to bear everything in silence, and that she did not have to keep running from whatever existed between them. The air around them shifted, heavy and fragile. Amara lowered her gaze, trying to steady her. The night deepened around the mansion with a slow and deliberate heaviness, as though the world itself sensed that everything built up over the last days was finally reaching a point of no return. The lights inside glowed warmly, contrasting the cool stillness of the gardens outside. The dinner had ended successfully, conversations fading into satisfied farewells as guests began to depart. Ryan walked among them with steady composure, offering final words of gratitude and shaking hands with business partners who praised the event's flawless execution. Yet his mind was elsewhere, drifting again and again to that interrupted moment in the corridor with Amara. Every smile he gave, every polite nod he offered, felt like something done on autopilot, while his thoughts strained toward finding her again. Amara worked in the background with practiced calm, coordinating with the last of the staff and ensuring everything transitioned smoothly into cleanup procedures. Her voice remained composed, her movements efficient, but an unmistakable tension followed her in the quiet moments between tasks. She felt the pressure of emotions she had kept buried for too long, and knew she was close to crossing a threshold she could never step back from. When the final guests exited through the tall wooden doors and the mansion finally settled into exhausted silence, the staff began dispersing to their quarters. Amara remained near the main hall, reviewing the event report on her clipboard, though her eyes barely registered the words. She knew Ryan was somewhere in the mansion, likely searching for a moment to speak with her again, and the idea both unnerved and compelled her. Eventually the hall emptied until she stood alone, save for the soft echo of footsteps approaching from the far end. She did not need to turn to know it was Ryan. His presence filled the quiet space even before he said her name. She inhaled deeply, grounding herself before facing him. He walked toward her with a deliberate calm, though the tension in his eyes betrayed his internal urgency. He asked her if she was avoiding him. The question was simple, yet it held the weight of all the moments they had left unresolved. She replied that she was not avoiding him but trying to stay focused, that tonight was too important for distractions. Her voice carried a firmness she did not fully feel. Ryan stepped closer, stopping just a few feet from her. He reminded her that responsibilities did not erase what existed between them. He told her that pretending nothing had changed was only making things harder for them both. His tone was steady but edged with a vulnerability she had never heard from him before. Amara looked away toward the now dimmed chandeliers, as though searching for answers in the shadows of the quiet hall. She admitted that everything between them unsettled her, not because it was unwelcome, but because it was too real, too strong, and too dangerous to acknowledge without thinking of the consequences. She worried that letting her guard down would unravel everything she had worked for, everything she owed to herself, her family, and to the position that brought her here. Ryan listened without interrupting. He stepped forward just enough to close the lingering space between them, yet not enough to touch her. He told her that he had seen her strength, her loyalty, her discipline, and he respected all of it. But he also saw how much she had sacrificed to maintain her walls. He told her that choosing something for herself was not weakness. His words cracked something inside her, something she had held together for years with sheer discipline. She felt a tremor run through her chest, and her voice faltered when she asked him what he expected her to choose. Ryan took a slow breath and told her plainly that he wanted honesty, with him and with herself. He did not demand an answer or a promise, only that she stop pretending her heart was unaffected. The raw sincerity in his voice unsettled her more than any demand could have. Before she could gather a response, a sudden flicker of lights overhead broke the tension. The hall dimmed for a moment before stabilizing, a reminder that the mansion's systems were already powering down for the night. The interruption gave her an escape she did not immediately take. Instead, she looked at him with a softness that replaced the rigid caution in her eyes. She admitted that she was afraid, not of him, but of the possibility of wanting something she could not protect herself from if it fell apart. Ryan stepped another inch closer, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. He told her that fear was not something she needed to carry alone anymore. The words settled between them with a gravity that made the air thick. For the first time, Amara did not try to deflect or ground herself in logic. Instead, she let the truth settle between them, unshielded and unmasked. She told him that she did care, far more than she had ever planned to, and far more than she knew how to handle. A silence followed, but it was no longer the silence of avoidance. It was a silence of understanding, of something finally acknowledged after being ignored for too long. Ryan's expression softened, and he finally allowed himself to touch her hand, slowly and carefully, as though giving her every chance to pull away. She did not. Her fingers curled back around his, a gesture small yet profound enough to shift everything between them. The moment stretched quietly until both of them exhaled, tension melting into something heavier but far more real. When the night grew deeper and the mansion grew colder, they walked together through the hall toward the exit, neither rushing nor speaking, simply allowing the newfound clarity to settle into place. Before parting ways, Ryan turned to her and reminded her gently that whatever came next would be faced together, not alone. Amara nodded, and the look in her eyes held a mix of relief, uncertainty, and the beginnings of trust. They went their separate ways for the night, but for the first time, either of them felt the weight of distance. The air around them had changed. Something unresolved had finally found its shape, and although the road ahead remained uncertain, both of them knew they would no longer walk it apart.